Good morning or afternoon, evening, depending on when you're checking in with us today. Welcome back to Psych 200, Decolonization and Resilience in Indigenous Communities. I am here today reporting from my office. I'm locked in, so have all my PPE to get on campus. But today we're going to be talking about critical thinking, and it's really going to be in connection with one of the first lessons that we had last week in terms of critical listening. So I'm going to actually pick up from there, and then that way we can continue on development of our critical thinking skills from that point. So let me go ahead and switch screens so you guys can take a look at what's going on here. Let me open this up for you guys. So critical thinking, it's a continuation of what we started last week in terms of what's necessary for moving forward with decolonization. Let me go ahead and move my face here. There we go. So critical listening, remember we talked about this and I presented this last week in terms of our 4 steps of what critical listening is. And the first step is going to be our analysis, right? That we're breaking apart an argument or a presentation to us into smaller parts, and then we're thinking about each part separately. And ultimately, our end game is to find out whether or not the argument holds water, as my mom says, right? Or what kind of truth it's lending towards. After that, in order to get to that part, right, we need to go through a synthesis process in which we put those different ideas back together to try to figure out if we can come up with a solution for the problem that's at hand. Ultimately, we move into our evaluation step where we're making a judgment based off of the analysis synthesis. So we've taken apart the argument, we've put it back together with all these complex components in order to find out if this is a sound solution or if we need to continue and go back to our analysis part, go back to our synthesis part to retry again, right? That our evaluation is demonstrating that through our analysis and through our synthesis, whatever problem that is handled, we've come up with some sort of sound solution. After that, right, we don't just stop there and we're like, all right, that's a good plan, guys. Good job. Next, on to the next project, which is what most people do, right? When you read research, a lot of research is done so that they can do research for research's sake. They got money to do it, so why not run the program? Why not run the surveys and the research techniques? But in the end, the reports are very well, this could be applicable in the community. When we start really moving into critical thinking and decolonization and critical listening, and we put them all together, it's really all about this application part, right? We take our judgment and we actually move on it, right? There's an actual movement process that's taken into consideration. And so when we're taking a look at these, that's what you want to remember, is that, especially from a tribally specific critical thinking perspective, our end game is to apply and to come up with some sort of solution, not suggestions, not, well, this is interesting to know, to actually find some sort of real life solution for real life scenarios that are affecting our tribal people. Right? So now this brings us to today's discussion and the readings that you guys had, which talk specifically about tribal critical thinking and the stages of tribal critical thinking. Now, I want to make sure that you have the two separated, right? That we have critical listening steps and then we have critical thinking stages. Okay, so try to keep those guys. They very much are intertwined. In each one of these stages, we are going to apply all of these steps, right? So in banking, you analyze, you synthesize, you evaluate, and you apply, right? But it's the level that you're able to hit that, which is going to change the stage that you're in. So when we start critical thinking, right, think about your classes in high school and elementary school, where they don't really want you to come up with responses outside of the box. They want you to memorize, right? These are the facts. This is what you need to know. What event took place on this day? Who are the key people that you need to remember? And I'm not saying banking is a bad stage. I'm just saying that in terms of critical thinking, it's pure memorization, right? You want to think about your banking stage as your parrot stage. They tell you what they want you to know, and you repeat it back. right? And so that's that basic level of critical thinking, right? Where you don't really question what's going on. You just take in the information and you're able to recite it back out. Okay. Even many of your general education, very 100 level classes will require you to do that banking, right? That banking component. Even in this class, right? I'm asking you guys to memorize these stages. That's banking, right? That's that banking stage. When you start to develop more critical thinking skills, you move forward towards a new stage, which we call analytical independence. This stage is what I call my firework stage, right? You start to think, I don't know if that's a sound argument. You start to think, well, I can tell you that my life experiences coincide or don't coincide with this. Or, you know what? I think that doesn't make sense from my perspective or my experiences, but you're not yet willing to, fight the fight or if you're in a classroom, put your hand up, right? A lot of times from the teacher's perspective, I see my students in this stage, this analytical stage, and you'll see them look up or you'll see them touch their face or you'll see them kind of raise their hand and then pull it back down. Like they have something, that they have something to say, but they're just going to kind of cover it up and you know what, let's just keep going on. I don't want to complicate things, right? But they're your minds are going, right? And you start seeing these fireworks and you're starting to see how these lights are starting to connect to one another, but you're not yet ready to fully explain that out in public, right? It's stuff that's going on in your head, but that's that analytical independence. You start, your eyebrows go up, at least for me, my eyebrows go up. And I'm like, I don't know if that's, I think I'm not on board with this, right? Or, yeah, you know what? I never saw that connection before, but you got a point, right? That's that analytical independence. So you're moving beyond just the banking stage of repeating what people are telling you back. Big in the news, right? We see all these indigenous movements going on, Black Lives Matter movements going on, statements like when we were taught in elementary school, Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Well, from a tribal perspective, that's not the case. As a matter of fact, Christopher Columbus never landed on the actual continent, only in the islands until his fourth voyage. So and then questions start coming up like, well, we were here before Christopher Columbus, so how did he discover that, right? But in our elementary school years, we don't necessarily, at least in my elementary school years, didn't question, right, the authority at that time. It was all about banking. As we start to get older and we start to make those commentaries, that's when we start making that analytical independence. Now, in our deconstruction stage, I call this our debate stage of critical thinking because when we're looking at our deconstruction, we are all about, pulling apart that analyst component. We are about destroying, right, the common thought or the presentations that we're hearing. We're about pulling them apart and we're all about arguing, right? These are our great sophomore level, I call it sophomores, because they know enough to get them into the debate, but they don't know enough to produce anything at the end in terms of solution, like long-term solutions. A lot of short-term solution comes from this debate stage, but in terms of like policy change, there needs to be something a little bit more concrete, right? A little bit more critical thinking that goes into that. And so when we think about that stage, our deconstruction stage, a lot of times, especially when I was teaching over at UC Davis, no offense to anybody, right? But I ran into this the junior level scholars, even some of my contemporaries who I would call my angry Indians, right? They were just angry all the time. And I'm not saying that anger is a bad thing. It's a great thing to channel and to use as a motivation, but they got stuck in this debate stage where they would say stuff like, I don't need to study Spanish. I don't need to study French. Because those are the colonizers' languages. And so, or we don't need to study Western theory. We don't need to know Western science. And so they want to throw, what I call it is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Just because it's written by a non-native person, we're going to throw it out the window. We don't need it, right? But a lot of things, and they think right, that we cannot use all of these tools in a positive way, or turn them into weapons. And so what I strongly push my students there to do, and you guys as well, is to think about, all right, how do we utilize this, how do we not throw the baby out with the bath water? Well, why is it that I'm so fluent in Italian and Spanish and in these other languages? Well, it's because the Navajo Nation is located at the very northern region of the Spanish Empire during the colonial period. So understanding, right, what their perspective, I'm able to read what they wrote about us. I'm able to listen to the discourses that people were and are having about Navajo people in the Spanish language, and I'm able to refute it, or I'm able to support it, or I'm able to engage in dialogue in it. So being able to be, polyglot and speak all of these languages, including languages that are not indigenous languages, right, is a very valuable tool, right? It's a very valuable weapon. And so it's not to, right, continue conversion. It's not to continue um, uh, propaganda, and we'll talk about that in a second. It's actually to move us forward so that we can continue to deconstruct, and so that we can continue to start breaking free from some of these very blanket colonizing and assimilating policies. It's so that we're able to respond and understand those. In terms of like throwing out all of this theoretical knowledge and Western texts that have been written about us, right? There's a lot of things that we have, I don't want to say necessarily lost, but we've let go as Navajo people. So you know what? Let's look at language, for example. The Franciscan friars, they are Christian, they are colonizing, they are out for conversion, right? That's one of their end games, but they were also fantastic linguists. So can I utilize their sources without falling prey to these areas? Sure, I can, right? And so if we look at this type of ethnographical documentation of Navajo people, we're able to start piecing back together areas that perhaps we have left behind, right? And so, like I said, just remember, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so a lot of times in this area, we get that type of resistance. And that's not necessarily what we're working with. Oh, sorry, guys. I don't know who's calling from Tucson, but they're going to have to wait. And then we hit our mecca, right? Our mecca of critical thinking, which is going to be our conscientization stage. It's going to be our dialogue stage. And I really want to make this very clear. Dialogue does not mean that we're getting along with everybody. Dialogue does not mean everybody can sit down calmly at the table and remove emotion. Dialogue means that we are able to sit down. I'm able to listen to the other person, critically listen to the other person, understand how they arrived at the perspective that they arrived at, and that I am able to also sit down with that individual and explain to them how I arrived at my perspective. And then we can together come up with a working solution to deal with the problems that we're taking a look at. And so a lot of the things that we'll be taking a look in the class this semester or this summer session deal a lot with looking at that spectrum of perspectives and then figuring out, all right, how do we come up with a working solution for these areas? So those are our stages of critical thinking. And so one of the things that I really want to ask you guys to think about is, what stage do you feel that you're at, right? Using the characteristics of each stage, write down how you might advance your critical thinking skills, right? So I'm going to go ahead and stop, well, not stop, but I'm going to give you guys, right, 5 minutes to really just write down, right, what stage do you feel that you're at, right? Here are our stages: banking, analytical independence, deconstruction, conscientization. I want you to feel free to write down, right, in 5 minutes, where do you think that you're at? And remember, you don't have to be at one solid stage. This class isn't about trying to find out, right, which block you fit in. It's about taking a look at the spectrum. So if you feel that you, in certain areas like academics, Maybe you're at the banking stage, or maybe you're at the analytical independent stage, but in other areas of topics such as, I don't know, sheep butchering, right? Your critical thinking ability or your understanding of sheep and how it's intersected with Navajo people fits at a different stage. So I want you guys to take the next 5 minutes and think about where you guys fit in terms of your critical thinking stage. Okay, guys, so 5 minutes up. You're going to come back to this, obviously, for your discussion post, but just keep that in mind that these are the areas of critical thinking that I want you to think about. Now, thinking alone, right, which those stages, a lot of times we find ourselves thinking alone, we can utilize, right, and bring ourselves together. That's the purpose of dialogue, right, and conversation, and not just, right, just to talk, but to walk is to bring together all of these different voices, and we can do that in positive ways through synergy, right? When two or more people work together and they share ideas, and the result is greater than any one person could produce, right? Critical thinkers in the latter stage understand the significance of synergy, when to use it and when to limit it. And so I have a very good case in point. I was working with a non-Navajo, non-native scholar in one of our advanced Indigenous research methods class. And there was a point where, the two of us coming together was producing, where we were producing results better than one person could produce. But when we came to debate areas, I found myself and my voice falling a little bit behind. I actually have an article coming out about this. And I realized that synergy in that class wasn't, it reached its peak in terms of what was beneficial for our students, and that actually I was giving the other person a way too much voice in terms of the direction of the class and the growth of the students, in which I needed to limit it, right? And so there needed to be a voice to step up and say, hey, we need to cut this out. I appreciate your input up to this point, but it's no longer beneficial. And so when we take a look at that, we're also looking at propaganda devices. I want to go ahead and move myself down here, right? And you want to start paying attention when you move into propaganda, right? And this is something that is very important for both critical listening and critical thinking, right? Because the rationales that other people will find will fall into usually one of these 7 types of propaganda areas, right? One is going to be name calling, right? Labeling people. When we take a look at name calling, it connects a person to um, a product or an idea to something negative normally, right? It's calling somebody a mudslinger, an infidel, right? A heathen, those kinds of things. All in the purpose to dissuade your, right, your vote. Let's just use votes in this particular perspective. We also have this glittering generality, right? These are amazing slogans, right? We see these with their use of words or ideas that evoke emotional responses, and people are like, yeah, that's right. But in the end, right, um, we start realizing it. When is it just propaganda? We'll see this a lot with Navajo, the use of Navajo language. People will use these phrases over and over again, but there's no like "tawjit ego," which is a very powerful Navajo phrase for self-reliance and self-accountability, and critically thinking about your own personal actions. But we use it as a way to, kind of just throw it around, and people band behind us for that. And in our next propaganda device, we see this transfer, right? A party or someone or something such as a symbol or a logo, which is considered divine, right? To raise obedience, right? We see logos like our flags. They could even be the Navajo Nation flag or the United States flag. Logos, symbols, you can think about those types of things that are brought together. And their reason why we do that is we're relating a product to someone or something we like, right? And so that's what we see. So when you see, for example, this logo for the Navajo Cultural Arts Program, we want people to associate it with Navajo ways of thinking, Navajo cultural arts. That's the purpose of that. So we are associating people and a group with those types of logos or symbols. Once again, they can be used in positive and negative manner. So you want to think about those things. I'm thinking, for example, the office of the vice president, and the Navajo Nation president. I don't know if you guys remember. If not, Google it, because it didn't hit mainstream media. There was a tremendous amount of cover up about it. When we first started the 57-hour lockdowns, there was supposed to be no large gatherings, especially any large gatherings over the limit of 10 people. And the office of the vice president and President Nez allowed, right, for a church gathering to take place in Ganado, which happens to be, as of a couple weeks ago, a new hotspot on the reservation. I don't know if there's any types of correlation. I sure hope not, right? But the big thing is that, President Nez was claiming that he never gave responsibility for it. However, it's on official presidential letterhead, permission that was given to this organization to host these large groups. And so it brought up a lot of heat, because we were told not to meet for traditional ceremonies, but they were allowing pre-meetings for Easter celebrations. And so those are the kinds of things that got negative feedback, because on that letterhead, it was the president's letterhead that went out. So regardless whether or not the President Nez knew about it or not, he is held accountable for it, because that logo and that official document came from his office. And so they should have been consulting and in conversation. So those are some of the things that we think about in terms of transfer. Testimony. This is when we have a figurehead that gives some sort of attestation. A well-known person is going to endorse a product so that we utilize the product, right? And so we see that happening a lot, especially in commercials, where people are getting these very lucrative testimonial packages. So when you think of one individual, you think of their product. And so those are the things that we think about. Oh, the plain folks talk. This reminds me of the subway guy, which I think didn't end really well for him. I think he got brought into court case for something bad, something deviant, like sexual deviance or something like that. But anyway, this is a statement coming from a plain person, right? A normal person, somebody who just like an everyday person, and they're telling you the amazingness of this product. I'm thinking like of Beachbody, and I'm a Beachbody coach. So, but I see that all the time, right? That's one of the things that we use to sell is plain folks, right? Testimonials. I had these results, and if you participate in these types of activities, you could have the same results as I am. And I'm not a personal trainer. I don't have a personal trainer. I don't have a lot of money to hire a personal trainer, go to a gym. But if you participate in these types of activities and take these shapes, you'll have the same types of outcomes that I will. I'm just your average Joe or Joette, right? There's card stacking, right? Card stacking you'll see a lot in academia, and you also have to double fact check those. People will just throw data at you, right? These types of data, facts, data, like boom, 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 as in order to sway you to understand their cause. And the last one is bandwagoning, right? This is an invitation for people to join, because 9 out of 10 people do it. So why don't you want to be part of, right, that bandwagon? It asks you to join the crowd and take action because everybody else is doing it. My favorite example of this is thinking of the chapter house. When you're in chapter house meetings, I know we haven't had many, especially public ones, since the COVID-19. But when you go to the chapter houses and people are voting on resolutions, right? How many, right, individuals or resolutions do you see with 4, 5, 6 people, right, opposing, or even just 2 people opposing? That's even worse, right? Because you're now opposing, but the general population has their hand up for, yes, I approve this resolution. How many of you guys find yourself raising your hand because you're required to vote in order for quota, but at the same time, you don't want to say no, you have questions about this resolution because you don't want to attract that type of attention, right? So those are types of propaganda devices that you want to listen to find out whether or not somebody's just trying to dissuade you, or if those presentations are actually aligning with your own personal values. So keep that in mind, because one of your activities for your discussion posting will deal with propaganda devices. I'm gonna move my face up here. um, I don't want us to think, right? So you had this reading, it's in very academic jargon. You had this nice little presentation of 7 propaganda devices to take a look at. I don't want you to think that we don't, as Navajo people, have our own critical thinking process. It's been presented to you guys over and over and over again, many times, right? Just as a propaganda device. It's in your syllabus. Take a look at any one of your Diné College syllabus, and you will see the phrase "Sa'an agoy b'kehoshon" written in it, right? And then they talk about it for a hot second, and then they move on, right? And then you never hear from it ever again. But the reason why it's in your syllabus is because every one of your class is supposed, right? Every one of your classes is supposed to take this critical thinking approach. And when you think about it, right, these stages of nzag as nahat, ina, sihasin, right? And it gets very nicely translated into English in your syllabus, and even in a lot of our coursework as thinking and planning and living and self-assurance. But there's a lot more, right, that is built up into our Navajo critical thinking skills, right? Ntak is asking us to think about, right, to think about who we are as Navajo people and where our ontological formation is. How do we know that things exist? How do we know that things are, exist in our reality, even if we can't see it? Where does that heart of our belief system start at, right? How do I know, right, it's going to be raining? Not because the weather forecast told me, it's because I know how to read the moon and the moon cycles, right? How do I know, right, that somebody has made it after they pass away? How do I know that they've made it to the next world after that 4-day journey, or they didn't, right? And so we wait for falling or falling of snow, some sort of precipitation to let us know at that time period. And so, and not everybody makes it. And we understand that because it's built into our untag as how we think, right? That's what untag is. And I mean, we can go on and on about that. We can in our discussion post if you're more interested in talking about that. Nahat'a, when we talk about nahat'a, we're taking a look at, all right, how, yes, planning, but how does our planning, right? How does our, um, our epistemological systems, right? How we're going to build up the way that we're going to approach this issue fall back on and is based in that ontological formation, right? How does it coincide? Or are we taking a different path? So those are the things that we need to also keep in mind. Ina is more than just living, right? It's putting into action. It's our actual methodology. It's our actual, right? We're going out and we're going to, right, make a judgment call based off of, right, what's going on here, right? And our ontological formation and our epistemological formation. We're taking all of these and we're now making the best judgment calls that we can in order to proceed in, right? And then here's that sihasin part. Here is, a lot of times it gets presented very fluffily, right, as our critical evaluation or self-assurance or assuring, but it's really taking a look at ourselves and saying, where did I not produce or think ethically or cross boundary lines that didn't coincide with my ontological formation of who I understand myself to be as a Navajo woman or a Navajo man, and where, how could I fix that, right? And how do I start over again, right? Because we are critical thinking, just like a basket is circular, right? It's spherical. So how do I redo this again? I just don't quit, right? I start back up and start back over again. So for our Navajo people, we have our own critical thinking processes. Another thing that I was thinking about when I was talking about and writing about Diné critical thinking is that we have gender assignments, right? A lot of times, especially now, we fall into this realm where um, we want everything to be open to everybody, but there are actual built into our system, right? Who we are as Navajo people, gender roles. And those gender roles are varied, right? We look at our gender roles as in being like in 5 different types of gender, which is way more complicated than looking at male and female. We have males who have these masculine traits. We have males who have feminine traits. We have females who have these very feminine roles. And then we have females who have these masculine traits. And then we have Natlehe, which has both sexual parts, right? Not just talking about transgender here. It's more than that. You are anatomically, right, created with both of those gender parts, or neither, right? And so that's when we talk about that 5th gender. And each one of those genders, right, has a specific role in society, has a specific responsibility, can and cannot participate in certain events at certain times or even at all. And so that critical thinking, the genderized component, also gets put into who we are as Navajo people. So keep that in mind, just on the back burner, because I don't know if we get a chance to talk about gender in this particular class, but it will come up when we start talking about gender in our Advanced Indigenous Research Methods class. And then the last thing I really want to focus in on is when we take a look at critical thinking, I want you guys to remember that change your center of direction. From our Western framework, our grounding, right, area is always going to be the north, right? The North Star. Our compass points north. Even taking a look at how the compass for, right, the origins is we're looking at these polar poles, right, from northern polar pole and southern polar pole, and that's how our compass functions. And so those are the things that you want to take a look at, which is one worldview. But when we're looking at it from a tribal perspective, we're looking at it from an Eastern, right, an Eastern component, which means that the way that we understand the world is always going to be starting from the East, right? When we look at it, we see white here, we see this opening here, and we see this opening right here. It's always going to start to the East. And I know up to now, for those of you guys who've taken foundations classes, and for some of you guys, it's all about memorizing colors, right? White, blue, yellow, black. But I want you to change your center of your direction and think a little bit more critically about that, because these aren't just colors, they're stones, right? And it's when you start thinking about that in that perspective, stones are alive and minerals are alive. And so when we're thinking about that, and we start really to address those areas, Ntzak as Nahat Aina Sihasin, those, right, critical thinking areas for Navajo people are associated with these stones. So when we go out to make offerings, when we need help, right, we don't just make blanket calls for help. We pull out these stones, right, and we start to think about how we can utilize them to help ask for help, or in some cases demand help, right? And so those are the things that you really need to focus in on, is to think beyond memorizing the color, right? And understand that these are entire living entities of stones that are built into our system. So what I want you guys to do, in addition to our discussion post for today, is I want you to go find all your baskets in your house and all your pottery in your house and all your weavings in your house and see these openings that need to be pointed to the east and change it. A lot of people like to put their baskets so that it points up. Nope. Change it and turn it and point it to the east. Take your pottery, change it and turn it and point it to the east, because you're now regrounding your house, right? According to, right, tribal critical thinking, according to Ntzag es Nahat Ahina Dosin, you're welcoming that in. And so that's what I'm asking you guys to just give it a shot, see if it changes certain things. And so that's what we have for you guys today. I hope you enjoy your discussion posts and you enjoyed a little bit about this presentation. If you have any questions, either put them in the comments of the video or you can include them in your discussion posts. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us today.